Have you ever heard of a man who laughed his way into danger? Not a soldier. Not a spy. But a jester. Tonight, we drift back to the year 1678. To the smoky halls of Hampton Court Palace in England, where laughter echoed louder than logic, and where one man's jokes may have saved a kingdom. Our story begins not with a king, nor a queen, but with the man who was paid to make them laugh. His name was Thomas Wigglesworth. Yes, that's right, Wigglesworth. A name that sounded like someone who tripped over his own feet while trying to spell it. Thomas wasn't born to be a fool. He simply became one. Because when life hands you nothing, no land, no title, no hope, sometimes all you have left is timing. And Thomas, oh, he had timing. He could mimic the Archbishop's snore, juggle silver spoons while quoting Hamlet, and once made the Earl of Sussex spit wine out his nose, a noble achievement in any decade. But what made Thomas truly exceptional wasn't his humor. It was his curse. You see, Thomas could talk to ghosts. And not the dramatic, float through the walls kind. No, these were bored ghosts. Petty ghosts. Gossipy ghosts. The kind who would haunt a throne room not because they had unfinished business, but because they refused to miss the drama. It all began on a Tuesday. Because naturally, all disasters begin on Tuesdays. Thomas was polishing his bells, the little ones sewn into his hat, when the first ghost arrived. Don't tighten that strap, you'll look desperate. A voice hissed from nowhere. Thomas blinked. No one there. He turned back to the mirror. I said, the voice continued, if you cinch it any tighter, your head will look like a rotten turnip in bondage. He froze. Standing just behind him, shimmering slightly like a puddle of moonlight, was a short, plump gentleman in royal robes, missing his feet. Are you real? Thomas whispered. The ghost smirked. Define real. If by real, you mean deeply disappointed in your fashion sense, then yes. Thomas fainted. Because even a jester has limits. When he awoke, the ghost was still there. And he drools when unconscious. Delightful, the ghost muttered. Thomas sat up, trembling. Are you one of the dead kings? The ghost rolled his eyes. Sir Godfrey of the Chamber Pot. Died tragically in 1612. Slipped on gravy. Thomas blinked. What? History remembers me poorly, Godfrey sighed. I was a great thinker. I invented indoor sarcasm. From that day on, Thomas saw them. Everywhere. A duke who haunted the wine cellar just to complain the port was too sweet. A ghostly maid who criticized everyone's posture. A headless French noblewoman who only screamed about wigs. They followed him. Corrected his jokes. Interrupted his sleep. And once, ruined an entire performance by shouting punchlines early. Thomas hated it. But then, came the night he heard the whisper. It was late. The court had grown quiet. Too quiet. Thomas wandered the halls, his bells muffled in a cloth. And that's when he heard it, a whisper not from any ghost he knew. Beware the man who smells of nutmeg. He froze. Excuse me? He asked the air. No answer. Nutmeg. Silence. And then, just the faintest echo. Poison in the pie. That night, a royal feast was held. The Queen's favorite, mutton, pie, and scandal. Thomas stood beside the table, eyes wide. And then he saw him, the Duke of Welling, slicing into the pie. The scent of nutmeg trailing after him. It was absurd. It was nonsense. It was ghost nonsense. But Thomas panicked. He threw himself across the table, smacking the pie out of the Duke's hand and into a tapestry of Queen Elizabeth. The entire court gasped. And the Duke? He went red. You fool. But minutes later, the royal taster dropped to the floor, convulsing. The pie had been poisoned. Thomas was locked in the dungeons for 3 days. Ghosts kept him company. You saved the Queen, one moaned. Could have saved the pie, another muttered. When they finally let him out, the Queen herself summoned him. She didn't smile. But she didn't have him executed either. Tell me, she said coldly. Who warned you? And Thomas, not knowing what else to do, told her the truth. Every word. The ghosts. The gravy. The nutmeg. The Queen stared. And then she laughed. Just once. A small, reluctant, royal chuckle. And from that moment on, Thomas Wigglesworth was no longer just a fool. He was the ghost whisperer of Hampton Court. There are moments in life when the world tilts, not dramatically, like a storm at sea, but subtly, like the teacup in an old woman's hand, right before she drops it. For Thomas Wigglesworth, court jester and accidental ghost confidant, that moment came 3 days after he saved the Queen from a poisoned pie, by listening to a dead man in royal tights. Since then, things had changed. For starters, Thomas now had his own chamber. It was the size of a broom closet, smelled faintly of pickled herring, and had a view of precisely half a brick wall. But it was his. No more sleeping in storage rooms between barrels of wine and old wigs. Secondly, the Queen now called him Sir Wiggles. Not out loud, of course. But Thomas was certain she muttered it under her breath. Possibly with a smirk. And finally, most disturbingly, the ghosts had gotten organized. Right, daily report. Sir Godfrey the ghost clapped, his hands phasing through a chair. Lady Beatrice, you cover the West Wing. Pierre, you float through the wine cellars, taste nothing. Remember the last incident. And Henry, you monitor the royal chamber pots. Why me? Henry grumbled. Because you're dead and you drew the shortest rib. Thomas, meanwhile, was trying to enjoy his tea. A task made impossible by the painting on the wall. It was of King Edgar the occasionally reasonable, who had ruled for 4 months and invented nothing but double-pointed shoes. The portrait, like most in Hampton Court, had recently discovered a voice. Your posture is a national embarrassment, King Edgar groaned. Slouch again and I shall haunt your reflection. Thomas sighed. You've been dead for 2 centuries. Yes, and yet your table manners offend me. That morning, as Thomas was buttering stale bread, he heard something unusual. A whisper, low and sharp. Like a blade drawn over velvet. The clock is ticking, the rose is wilting, and the raven sings too soon. He paused. All right, he muttered, that's either poetry, or code. The ghost of Lady Beatrice appeared beside him, fanning herself with a spectral spoon. "Did you hear that too?" Thomas asked. "I hear everything," she replied grandly. "Even when no one speaks. Especially then." Soon, the whispers grew louder. More fragmented. More cryptic. "Tuesday. Watch the red boots. Ink on the Queen's decree, forged. The silver bell will ring, and the crown shall fall." It was ghost gossip, annoying, useless. Except when it wasn't. That night, a banquet was held to honor a visiting ambassador from Prussia, Lord Wenzel of the Wild Hare. Thomas, as royal fool, was expected to perform. Juggle a pheasant. Mimic the Queen's corgi. Usual nonsense. But just as he stepped into the dining hall, he froze. The man seated beside the ambassador, a new advisor. Pale with perfectly trimmed red boots, reeked of something worse than nutmeg. He reeked of ambition. "Don't trust him," muttered a voice from behind a tapestry. "Red boots lie," added another. Thomas glanced around. A small painting of a woman winking in a field of turnips actually winked at him again. This was bad. Halfway through his act, as he pretended to be a goose reciting Shakespeare, Thomas saw the red-booted advisor slip something beneath the ambassador's napkin. Something silver. His heart pounded. "The silver bell will ring, and the crown shall fall." Not again. Thomas cleared his throat, turned to the Queen, and, with zero warning, launched himself across the banquet table once more. This time, he tackled the Prussian ambassador. Cutlery flew. Pheasant exploded. Candles died dramatic deaths. And as gasps filled the hall, Thomas yanked away the napkin, to reveal a small, ornate bell, laced with powdered nightshade. It was treason. But not from the ambassador. No, the red-booted advisor vanished before sunrise. Vanished, that is. In the way people do when the Tower of London becomes their final mailing address. That night, the Queen summoned Thomas again. "You tackled a foreign diplomat in front of 12 nobles, a bishop. And my aunt," she said, sipping wine. "Why?" Thomas hesitated. "A talking turnip painting told me to." The Queen stared. Then, again, that reluctant chuckle. "I should have you flogged," she said. But then who would listen to the haunted wall art? Thomas replied. She sighed. "Fine. You live." And with that, Thomas was unofficially appointed royal whisperer of the dead and fool of the slightly useful variety. Outside the royal chambers, Sir Godfrey floated beside Thomas. "You've made quite a mess," he said proudly. Thomas shrugged. "Better a mess than a monarchy in flames." The ghost grinned. "Good lad. Now, tomorrow, there's a whisper about a haunted chicken. Could be serious." Thomas groaned. Because sometimes, saving the kingdom meant listening to a painting insult your pants at 3 a.m. Some places hold memories. Others refuse to forget. In Hampton Court Palace, there was a hallway lined with oak panels, polished so perfectly they seemed to reflect not your face, but your secrets. And at the end of that hallway, hidden behind a crooked tapestry of a dog playing a lute, was a door that didn't belong to any modern floor plan. It led to the Whispering Library. Thomas had never been inside. He had passed it. He had heard about it. But it was Sir Godfrey, in all his grumpy, see-through glory, who finally brought him there. It's time, the ghost said, floating backwards through the tapestry like a man retreating from an embarrassing dinner. Time for what? Thomas asked, wary. To meet the archivists. Inside. The library breathed like a living thing. Not loudly, just subtly. A soft creak here. A flutter there. As if the books were exhaling, or perhaps, whispering amongst themselves. The room stretched impossibly wide. Dust spiraled in golden shafts of light. The air smelled of parchment, candle wax, and something older. Like secrets soaked into oak. This, Sir Godfrey said, sweeping a translucent hand around him, is where the dead file their complaints. Rows of books sat perfectly aligned. Except they weren't just books. Some shimmered. Some had titles that rearranged themselves. One had a lock shaped like a screaming mouth. Thomas approached a shelf. Letters from the Plague Rats, 1647 to 49, one spine read. Next to it. Things the bishop shouldn't have said, but did. He turned. What is this place? A memory, said a voice behind him. She was tall. Not in a threatening way. In a haunts your dreams gently but with purpose kind of way. She wore a tattered grey dress, like smoke stitched into form. Her eyes, pale blue, didn't blink. She floated more than walked. As if the floor didn't quite trust her weight. I am the lady in grey, she said softly. I catalogue what history forgets. Thomas bowed awkwardly. Thomas Wigglesworth. I catalogue jokes that miss. She moved beside him, trailing her fingers across the shelves. Her touch left a faint ripple in the air, like music underwater. You have stirred the palace, she whispered. Unintentionally. He replied. You heard the warnings. You saw the signs. You saved a queen. I fell on a pie, he said. Let's not exaggerate. She turned. Not many mortals hear us. Fewer still listen. But you act. Thomas looked around the room. What do you want from me? She pointed to a book. It opened on its own. Inside, ink formed slowly. Words, curling like smoke. A figure cloaked in crimson. Walks where he shouldn't. He knows the secret doors. He whispers to the living. But listens to something else. Thomas frowned. Cryptic. The lady in grey smiled. Clarity is rarely useful in matters of fate. Sir Godfrey hovered closer. There's more. We've had disturbances, places going cold. Rooms where no ghost dares linger. Something is brewing. Thomas swallowed. You mean, more poison? The lady shook her head. Not poison. Something worse. Erasure. They led him deeper into the library, past aisles where books wept ink and paintings wept tears. Past statues that blinked. Past a grandfather clock that ticked backwards. And at the very end, a mirror. Black as ink. Smooth as ice. It didn't reflect his face. It reflected someone else. A man in crimson robes. Masked. Holding a lantern shaped like a human skull. Who is that? Thomas whispered. No one knows, Sir Godfrey said grimly. But he has appeared in dreams of the dead. In stories no one remembers writing. The lady in grey touched the glass. He is the archivist of oblivion. Where we preserve memory, he buries it. Thomas stepped back. I'm just a jester. No, the lady said. You are the only living man who still hears the dead clearly. And soon, the dead may need you more than the living do. Sir Godfrey added, also. The Duke's ghost says someone stole his breeches again. So, you know, regular haunting business continues. They left the library with more questions than answers. And that night, as Thomas tried to sleep, a whisper crept through the walls. The mirror cracks, and the red man walks. The dead usually whisper, but that night, they screamed. Thomas Wigglesworth sat bolt upright in bed, his bells rattling on the hook nearby. A chill snaked down the corridor. Candles sputtered. Though none were lit. Godfrey, he called into the dark. No answer. Only the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoing, where no one walked. And a scent, faint, unfamiliar, like damp paper burning. He fumbled for his coat. The floor was too cold. The walls too quiet. Even the ghosts, normally as chatty as gossipy washerwomen at market, had gone silent. Then he saw it. A smear. Not blood. Not ink. But something between the two, staining the stone outside his door. It shimmered when he bent down. Like it wasn't just a liquid, but a memory melting. He reached to touch it. Don't. A voice. Right beside him. Thomas jumped. It was the lady in grey, appearing as if the shadows had birthed her. She looked worried. That was new. Do not touch what has been unmade, she said softly. It leaves a mark deeper than skin. Thomas stood. He's here, isn't he? The red-robed figure. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned, her body not quite following natural motion, and floated toward the long corridor near the throne room. And Thomas, heart-pounding, followed. As they walked, more of the palace revealed oddities. A guard asleep with his eyes open, murmuring in Latin. A candle melting upwards. A portrait of Queen and now facing the wall, despite being bolted. At the end of the corridor, the lady stopped. She raised her hand. A door, one Thomas had never noticed, creaked open. Behind it was a forgotten chamber. And standing inside, his back to them, was a man cloaked in crimson. He was silent. Still. But something in the air shifted, like gravity had changed direction. Like history held its breath. Then the figure turned. Slowly. His face was obscured by a mask, smooth, pale, too smooth, as if carved from the surface of the moon. In one hand, he held a lantern. Inside it, instead of flame, a tiny scroll burned endlessly, blackening, reforming, burning again. Who are you? Thomas whispered, though the fear in his throat tried to silence him. The figure tilted its head. No words came. But suddenly, Thomas felt them inside his mind. I am the keeper of what you forget. The editor of memory. The final pen. The voice wasn't spoken. It was written, carved into his thoughts like ink on parchment. The lady stepped forward. You do not belong here, she said. But the figure only raised his hand. And then, a portrait on the wall vanished. Not fell. Not burned. Vanished. As if it had never been painted. As if the subject had never existed. Thomas gasped. Did you see that? He whispered. That was Sir. Wait, who was that? I knew that face. And then it hit him. The memory was gone. Cleanly. Painlessly. Utterly. Stop him, the lady said. How? Thomas hissed. He doesn't even walk like a normal person. She turned to him, eyes glowing faintly. With laughter. Thomas blinked. Come again. Laughter is resistance, she said. It roots the moment. It sharpens memory. That's why fools exist, Thomas. Not just to amuse kings, but to hold history in place when it's slipping. You want me to tell jokes at an ancient ghost god? Preferably good ones, she said. Thomas took a breath and stepped into the room. Excuse me, robed sir. Masked spectre of creeping doom. The archivist turned. Did anyone ever tell you, you look like a cursed tomato in formal wear? Silence. Then, faintly, the burning scroll flickered. Thomas grinned nervously. Oh, we're cooking now, he muttered. Hey. Red Riding Hood called. She wants her cape back. A whisper stirred the air. And suddenly, the mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture. The archivist raised his hand. Pain stabbed into Thomas's head. Memories flickered. His mother's voice. His first tumble down a stairwell. His first joke. The smell of cinnamon rolls from the baker. All flickering. All threatened. And still, Thomas laughed. Hit a nerve, did I? He gasped. You erase stories, but guess what? I invent them. I am the joke, the jester, the memory no one buries. And with a final laugh, wild, reckless, honest, he sang. A crude tavern song. Badly. And loudly. The archivist recoiled. The scroll inside his lantern crumpled to ash. The mask shattered. And with a roar like wind through dead leaves, the figure vanished. Leaving behind a single page. Fluttering slowly to the ground. Thomas picked it up. It was blank. Until, slowly, words began to write themselves. The fool remembers. The fool remains. This is not the end. Behind him. The lady nodded. Well done, she whispered. He will return. But tonight, you win. Sir Godfrey suddenly appeared. Did I miss something? I was in the East Wing, oh hells, what did I miss? Thomas collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. I think I just fought a demonic librarian with sarcasm, he said. Sir Godfrey blinked. And survived. Apparently. The ghost paused. Nice. Morning in Hampton Court arrived not with sunlight, but with murmurs. A butler found a portrait missing. A chambermaid forgot her own name, briefly. A pigeon delivered a letter from a man who'd been dead for 60 years. And Thomas Wigglesworth? He awoke in the library, still in his nightshirt. Still sore from mental combat with an ancient memory-wiping spirit. And holding a blank page that refused to leave his hand. The lady in grey stood nearby, unusually still. Sir Godfrey floated upside down, trying to whistle through non-existent lips. Thomas sat up slowly. Did we win? Godfrey shrugged. Temporarily. The lady replied, he will return. He always does. Oblivion is persistent. But you held the line. The page in Thomas's hand had begun to itch. Not like an insect bite. Like it was rewriting him. He tried to peel it off. It stuck. What is this? He asked. The lady touched it gently. Her hand passed through, but she winced. The tax, she whispered. Tax. Memory is power, she said. And power always demands payment. Suddenly, Thomas felt heavy. He remembered things he had never lived. A boy trapped in a tower, calling for a mother who never came. A banquet turned funeral in Florence. The final breath of a librarian sealing scrolls before invaders stormed the walls. Too many stories. Too much pain. All real. All now, his. Make it stop, he whispered. Please. But the lady shook her head. Now you carry them, she said. You are their keeper. Their fool. Their voice. Sir Godfrey floated closer. Welcome to our world, lad. The one where memory weighs more than gold. Thomas staggered to his feet. I didn't ask for this, he snapped. I just wanted to make people laugh. And you will, the lady said. But now, your jokes matter more than ever. She pointed to the shelves. Dozens of books now bore his name. Tales retold by T.W. The Night of the Vanishing Portrait. The Fool Who Made the Past Laugh Again. Thomas stared. Those are mine? No, the lady said. They are theirs. But you remembered for them. He turned slowly. And what happens if I forget? The lady looked at him. And for the first time, smiled. Then the darkness wins. Suddenly, the mirror at the far end of the library cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Sir Godfrey jolted. Oh. What does that mean? Thomas asked. It means, the ghost said, your time is no longer, solely yours. That night. During the court banquet, Thomas performed as usual. He juggled. He sang. He insulted Lord Wendell's wig with such precision that the man's monocle fogged in shame. The court laughed. But Thomas watched. He saw shadows move where none should. A page boy forgot where he was mid-step. A noblewoman blinked twice and swore the tapestry had changed colors. Small things. But Thomas knew. Erasure had begun again. He slipped out early. Back to the whispering library. And there, waiting for him, was a letter. Handwritten. Sealed with wax. It read, Dear Thomas. If you are reading this, it means I no longer exist. But I was once real. I danced beneath the old chandeliers. I kissed a duke. I ruined 3 weddings and never apologized. Remember me. And I live again. Lady Constance Mayweather, 1782-1851-ish. Thomas closed the letter. His hands trembled. And somewhere, faintly, a bell rang. Not from a tower, but from memory. Some parts of Hampton Court were mapped. Some were memorized. But a few were simply avoided. Because to walk those halls meant remembering too much or worse, forgetting too soon. They called it the Grey Wing. Not because the stones were grey, though they were. But because even light seemed unsure of itself there. It bent. It dimmed. It hesitated. Like time. Trying to reverse. Thomas stood at the threshold. The lady in grey floated beside him. You said I had to carry their memories, he whispered. But what if the memories are hiding? She turned. Eyes unreadable. Then you must go find them. Sir Godfrey appeared, unusually serious. "I'll come with you." Thomas blinked. You hate effort." "I hate forgetting more." They stepped through the archway. At first, nothing. Just dust. Cobwebs. Silence. But then, the whispers began. "Mother, I can't find my shoes. They never came back from the woods. I was, who was I? Ghosts didn't float here. They hung in half-existence. Like ink washed too many times. Figures blurred around the edges, their faces only half-formed. Some had no eyes. Some had too many mouths. All were wrong." "This isn't haunting," Thomas whispered. "This is fading." The lady nodded. "These are the forgotten. Even in death, they are unnamed. The archivist leaves them here. Fragments. Echoes." Sir Godfrey grimaced. "This is where memory dies." One figure moved toward them. A child. Maybe. No voice. Only a hand reaching. In its grip, a doll. Burnt. Eyeless. Thomas knelt. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The figure blinked. "I was loved. I think. Once." Suddenly, Thomas felt it. The memory. Buried deep. A girl named Lena. Daughter of a cook. She died in a fire that no one recorded because no one important cared. No grave. No name on paper. But here. She reached for anyone to remember her. Thomas whispered her name aloud. And the figure glowed. Not brightly. Just enough. And then. She was gone. But the doll remained whole again. Sir Godfrey blinked. "What did you do?" "I remembered," Thomas said softly. "That's all." Then came the sound. Footsteps. Not his. Not Godfrey's. Something heavier. A shape moved in the distance. Red cloak. Masked face. Flickering lantern. The archivist. But this time, he wasn't alone. Figures followed him, not ghosts. But erased things. A man with no name stitched across his chest. A woman whose face blurred constantly. A priest who spoke backwards. And behind them all, a scream trapped in a mirror. "They're his army," Godfrey hissed. "No," the lady said. "They're his proof. That memory can be stripped clean. That history means nothing if no one dares remember." Thomas stood. And for the first time, he felt ready. "You wanted a jester," he said aloud. "But I'm more than a joke." He reached into his coat. Pulled out the page, still bound to his palm, now glowing faintly. He held it high. And began to speak. Her name was Lena. She liked burnt toast. She danced in kitchens. She died in silence. But now, we say her name. The air shivered. The archivist staggered. The erased behind him faltered. Their heads turned. "You're not the only one who writes," Thomas growled. "I write too. From shattered souls. Names. Stories. Songs half sung." And the grey wing, long dead, began to breathe again. The archivist let out a noise, not a scream, but worse. A hiss of defeat. He turned. Faded. Gone. Only the mirror remained. This time, not cracked. But open. Thomas looked in. And saw. Himself. Not as a jester. Not as a fool. but as a witness. Sometimes, truth doesn't sit on a throne. Sometimes, it hides under the bed. Thomas Wigglesworth hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not because of ghosts. Not because of the archivist. But because his dreams had started talking back. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a hallway of mirrors. And at the end, a door made of teeth. Inside that door, a voice whispered, "Find the king." He remembers, and that's why he forgets. So that morning, Thomas did something no jester should ever do without authorization. He snuck into the royal bedchamber. Not the new one. The old one. The sealed one. The one Queen Margaret had ordered closed 50 years ago after her husband, King Edmund III, went mad and began hiding under furniture. Claiming the mirrors are lying. The room was still. Cold. Smelled faintly of lavender and loneliness. Dust lay like snow. But the bed was untouched. And beneath it, a voice whispered, "I told them. I told them the clocks were wrong." But they laughed. And now, they forget. Thomas crouched. "Your Majesty." A pair of eyes blinked in the dark. Pale. Unblinking. But not unkind. King Edmund III, once ruler of all England, was curled beneath the royal bed, wrapped in layers of velvet like an anxious burrito. "You can see me?" the king asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "I thought I was just a dream," the king muttered. "I keep forgetting if I exist." Thomas slid closer. "You're not a dream. I think you remember too much." The king blinked. "Is it raining ink yet?" "Not yet," Thomas said gently. "Good," the king whispered. "That's how they come, you know. On rainy days made of memory." Over the next hour, Thomas listened. To the ramblings of a man who had seen too much. But in those ramblings were clues. The king spoke of a mirror that eats names. A book that writes itself backward. And a man in red. Who offered him peace in exchange for one small thing. To forget. "I said no," Edmund whispered. "I chose to remember. And so, he made me vanish instead. Not dead. Just lost. Like a bookmark left in a book no one reads anymore." Thomas stared. You saw the archivist?" The king's eyes turned sharp. "I named him," he whispered. Thomas gasped. "You mean?" "Shish." Edmund pressed a finger to his lips. "If you speak his name too clearly, he appears in soup. It's terrible." "Soup?" "Don't question me," the king said. "I was educated by monks and haunted by librarians." Thomas chuckled. Then paused. Something glimmered beneath the bed. He reached out. Pulled free a small wooden box. Carved with ancient symbols. Inside a mirror shard. But not cracked. Instead, it reflected the past. Literally. He held it up, and saw himself 3 days ago laughing in the banquet hall. The king watched. "That's yours now," he said. "Use it wisely. It sees what was, not what is." Thomas nodded. "Thank you." The king yawned. "Now if you don't mind. I've got 3 centuries of naps to catch up on." He rolled over, muttering, "Tell the shadows to close the door on their way out." As Thomas stepped out of the room, he felt it. A memory. Clear. Undistorted. Edmund III, the mad king no one spoke of, had not been insane. He had been a witness. Like Thomas. And he had paid the price. Back in the Whispering Library, Thomas showed the shard to the lady in grey. Her expression froze. "This changes everything," she said. Sir Godfrey peered over her shoulder. "Oh my. That's old magic. Pre-sarcasm, even. What does it do?" Thomas asked. "It reveals memory as it truly was," the lady replied. "Not as people retell. Not as the archivist edits." She touched the shard. And suddenly a vision bloomed in the air. A banquet. A betrayal. A queen who once whispered to the archivist, and traded a city's memory for immortality. Thomas gasped. "That was—" "Yes," the lady said. "That is the bargain at the heart of all this. Someone in this palace made a deal. And now," Sir Godfrey added grimly, "the past wants it back." There is a kind of silence that feels like the moment before a memory vanishes. Not loud. Not terrifying. Just empty. Thomas Wigglesworth stood in the center of the Whispering Library. In one hand, the mirror shard still glowing softly with memory. In the other, the blank page still fused to his skin. Around him, the air was thick with presence. The ghosts had gathered. Hundreds of them. From the kitchens. From the towers. From the halls where names were never spoken again. They watched him. Not with fear. But with hope. The lady in grey floated forward. "It's time," she said. "The archivist is returning." Thomas swallowed. "How do I stop him?" She looked at him gently. "You don't." He blinked. "What?" "You cannot stop forgetting," she said. "But you can fight it. Every laugh. Every story. Every name remembered is a battle won." Sir Godfrey chimed in, voice solemn for once. "And you, lad, you've made people laugh when it mattered most. That's magic we've long forgotten." And then he came. The archivist of oblivion. Shrouded in red. Masked. But this time larger. He towered like memory itself, unstoppable, inevitable. In his lantern burned not one scroll, but thousands, all memories stolen. He raised his hand. The ghosts flickered. One by one. They began to vanish. "No," Thomas whispered. "Not again." The page on his palm glowed, then burned. It hurt. But Thomas didn't let go. Instead, he did the only thing he ever truly knew how to do. He stepped forward and told a joke. It wasn't a clever joke. It wasn't even that funny. It involved a bishop, a goose, and a wheel of cheese. But it was honest. And when he delivered the punchline, he laughed. Not a chuckle. A real, belly-deep laugh. And the ghosts? They laughed too. The lady in grey smiled. Sir Godfrey let out a wheezing cackle. Even the walls shook with the echo of it. The archivist stopped. He tilted his head. The lantern dimmed. Thomas took another step. More laughter. More stories. He told the tale of Lena, the kitchen girl. Of Edmund, the king beneath the bed. Of every forgotten soul who had ever whispered in the dark. And as he spoke, the memories came back. One by one, the vanished ghosts returned. Whole. Laughing. Glowing. The archivist raised his lantern in fury. But Thomas held out the mirror shard. "You may erase names," he said softly. "But I carry them." And in the mirror, for the first time, the archivist saw his own reflection. Not a monster. Not a god. Just a man who had forgotten his own name long ago. The archivist trembled. And then, for the first time, he spoke aloud. "What was I before the forgetting?" Thomas looked at him gently. And, with kindness only a fool could muster, he said, "Maybe, you were a storyteller, too." And with that, the lantern cracked. The mask crumbled. The robes fell empty to the floor. And silence returned. Not empty this time. Just peaceful. The ghosts faded, not in fear but in rest. Smiling. Remembered. Thomas stood alone. The blank page had vanished. The mirror shard, cool in his hand. The lady in grey touched his shoulder. "You saved us." Thomas smiled. "No. They saved me. I just listened." That night, for the first time in weeks, Thomas slept. No whispers. No nightmares. Just a quiet memory of a kitchen girl. Spinning in laughter, holding a whole, unburnt doll. Years passed. Stories spread. Not of kings or wars. But of a fool, who listened when no one else did. They say, if you visit the old court on a quiet night, you might hear him. Still telling jokes. Still remembering. Still making the past laugh. One whisper at a time.